like to just go straight into the questions now. Of course, varied industries, very different variety of questions. What would you say, Mbithe, if we can just kick off with you? No, I must introduce you first. We've got Mbithe Mwema from African Alliance, and of course we've got Philip Mwema from the Nexus Business Directory. I realize we've got two Mwemas. Just to clarify, are you related? Are you married to each other? Have you met Mbithe for the first time today, perhaps?
Actually, they are today at the studio.
All right, we'll believe
so
you.
No relations.
We will believe your story. All right, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Of course, quite a lot of concern around the corporate circles. 18 companies have already announced profit warnings, at the Security Exchange. A number of CEOs have already exited. From what we understand, there's a couple more that might be coming through as well. We cannot give a blanket statement for what's going on, but if there's a paramount reason for what's happening, what would you say it is?
Thank you for having me on the show, and as Philip said, no relation, but pleasure to make your acquaintance as well. But moving back to the companies, I think you're absolutely right. 18 companies have reported warnings in terms of either they're not going to meet their profits, or it's going to be a very hard year for them going forward. But I think looking at it, the operational environment has not been that easy. You must recall last year there's a bit of volatility on the macroeconomic variables. If interest rates spiked towards the end of the year, that had a direct impact on the companies. And if you realize most of those companies that you're speaking about, the ones that have issued profit warnings, most of them had actually taken out debt or had made investments in the capital markets, and these investments didn't yield returns. For some of them, they'd taken out debt and had actually opted for foreign currency debt, because 2-3 years prior to last year, the currency had been stable and it was cheaper to borrow in dollars, for example. If you're borrowing at a 5% to 7% on dollar funding, that was very cheap compared to borrowing at 20+% on Kenya shilling. So unfortunately, what happened is when the currency turned and it depreciated, 12% last year, then there was a direct impact on these companies. So from operational level, they actually made money, but from an earnings perspective, they were not able to manage the volatility from a macroeconomic perspective.
What does that say about the health, of the Kenyan, macroeconomic space, or the Kenyan economy, so to speak? If indeed the Securities Exchange is a real barometer of the Kenyan economy, I know you've talked about, some of the positions they took in relation to debt last year. How about the trading space on its own from a macroeconomic point of view?
I mean, if you look at the macroeconomic factors within the Kenyan economy and the projections, we are projected in 2014-2015 we'll have a double-digit growth in terms of GDP. We ended up having a single-digit growth in GDP. Bill alluded to that in the last quarter of last year, we had interest rates getting to over 20%, 21% on the day Treasury bill. Then another external factor where the dollar went haywire. It's now, we now look like it's a norm with the dollar stabilizing at 100 plus. But remember, early in the year we had the dollar at about 80, 85, and we got later to the close of the last quarter of 2015. You had the dollar doing 101, 102, and central bank had to try and put in measures to try and stabilize the dollar. These external factors obviously do have an impact in terms of an operations of a company, because at the end of the day, remember, as a country, we are a net importer. When the dollar hits over 100, you had not predicted that in your financials, and at the end of the day, it hits on your bottom line. Now we are seeing now more often, I think in the last 1 year we've seen board members and shareholders demanding results. Yeah, if we take one of the examples on Project Mawingu, which you've alluded to, Alex Mbugwe then as a finance director drove Project Mawingu, which was a good expansion plan into the rest of Africa, but never predicted fuel oil getting to drop into the barrel that it did. And then with that, we had terrorism coming into place. So all the projects, here you've borrowed heavily geared to finance an expansion plan for planes, and you're heavily geared. That hits on your bottom line. The hedging that you've conducted as a prudent person at that point in time, you've hedged, and the hedging goes south. when the results come to $28 billion, the Association for the Airports under Captain Paul Gishinga demand blood. They say we want people to leave. And I mean, I look at that, for example, in that case, you just caught in the wrong circumstances at that point in time, external factors which you had no control of.
But of course there is the issue of internal factors as well. And let's look at Uchumi, for instance. While it is public knowledge, for instance, that employees of Uchumi were allowed, strangely enough, to supply, to their own to the own supermarket, and it's now alleged that the man who was put there as a turnaround strategist has now been allegedly, has been accused of being the first person that brought the company down. What does it say about the state of corporate governance?
Corporate governance has become a bit of a concern. But even beyond just looking at the companies that you've highlighted, if we actually look at ourselves as a community, we're always talking about corruption. If I'm at a roundabout and I cross the line, it's okay if I wink at the policeman, or if I give him like 200 shillings, I can go to the office. So the thing is, they always say that your leadership and even the substances of your businesses are always a reflection of the people. This corporate governance issues would not be happening if the people didn't allow for this to happen. So the thing is, I mean, there's so much that is happening, but you cannot be able to change a culture overnight. You cannot be able to get a generation and change it in 1 year. They say it takes up to 7 years to be able to change a culture. But if no one is being held culpable at a corporate level and even at a government level, then people begin to get away with it. So many of these things have been brought to light. We've talked about Kenya Airways, we've talked about Uchumi. And the information is out there, but it becomes like it's good to know, like, oh, okay, fine, so I can do anything bad as long as I don't get caught. So at some point, I suppose then we would want to ask our leaders to be able to give us guidance as to what is acceptable behavior and what is not acceptable behavior, but also to try and go beyond giving suggestions and perhaps have actions. Otherwise, then we end up having like a truckload of cases and a truckload of events and information dockets that say, on a particular year, this is the much we lost. On another particular year, this is the much we lost, because it actually catches up with us in the future.
So how culpable, are managers? I know you did mention in your point before about KQ that the external factors did play quite a big role in the 25 billion shilling dent. That's not even a dent, it's like a hole, so to speak. But how culpable is management?
I mean, it all boils down to good corporate governance. When you have a potential conflict of interest, okay, like I mean in the case of Uchumi, according to Dr. Ketnetich, where you're the CEO and you're supplying and paying yourself first, there lies the first problem. You have a conflict of interest. Okay, I think more and more there's need for good corporate governance to be within these entities as part of year-end reporting. I know that the IFRS standards do require the people to report about good corporate governance, but fundamentally it's your ethics or your virtues as a person. Okay, if I'm the CEO running this running a listed entity and I'm a major supplier paying myself, there's huge conflict of interest, and maybe the issue is, do we have enough mechanisms for people working within those organizations to have a whistleblowing mechanism that within a safe space they can whistleblow and call these to act as early as possible.
Talking about whistleblowing, a report by Ernst & Young that was done in June 2016 said 23% of Kenyan managers believe irregular adjustment of financial statements is prevalent in their firms. 23%. And I'm just wondering, what does this say about the quality of Kenyan companies or the quality of investing or the quality of investments? Kenyans work hard with their hard-earned money, yet they're putting money into companies where they might or might not believe in, because if they're cooking their books, what does that say about the health of investments?
You know what? This is Africa. So there's a way business is done. Whether we call it facilitation fees or whether we call it adjusting our books, I don't know what happens, because I've never had to sit in a company and audit, so I would not understand the process. But the way I look at it from an investment perspective, if Ernst & Young comes out and says 23% of the numbers that we see there are slightly flawed, then for me to make an investment case, I actually need to increase the risk factor. So for example, if I'm going to buy a stock at 10 shillings if it's quoted at 10 shillings today, then in my mind I should say, I don't feel that 10 shillings is actually the fair value, then maybe I should be looking at it at 6 shillings and then not opt to buy because of demand patterns that are actually supporting that. An additional point is, if you look at the information that has been out on Kenya Airways and Mumias, for example, the information is out there and everybody knows it, but we still get speculators in the market who say Mumias now is at this price level. So the question is it that these people don't understand what corporate governance concerns are, or is it that we are so money-minded that you don't really care? But the sum of this is you have to appreciate that there are risk factors in different markets. Africa is not as transparent as the developed countries. Not that the financials we see are misstated or not, but at times the way we report our numbers and the way we integrate information in our statements may be slightly different from other countries. That said, then the key thing is to consider the risk factors as you're making your investment.
Some even more staggering figures from the same ENY report. 41% of Kenyan managers believe that most companies report financial performance that are better than the actual figures, and they say they do so because of the pressure to meet ambitious targets. 41%.
Well, that's a huge and alarming number, because if you look at the finance directors or the finance managers running or who are responsible for these accounts, these are members or professionals who are qualified accountants and have been accountants, so it's our profession. There are mechanisms to check on this, and maybe one of the things, maybe auditors, that's a challenge to auditors, maybe one of the things the auditors need to start thinking about.
Should we put the auditors on the spot?
Absolutely. Maybe gone at the
How
days.
about the regulators?
No, I think, first of all, because you have an auditor who comes in at the end of the year, gone are the days maybe the auditor ceases to be a watchdog. Maybe it's high time auditors started thinking like bloodhounds, because those statistics are worrying, where if 46% say they report more than what's the actual number, then when you're coming for the interim audits on the end of year audits, maybe a bit more a requirement is in place about is required more of auditors. But I know the challenge on auditors again is if they're then to go to that next level, that next effort, it's an issue of cost. So corporate Kenya has to then be alive that audit going forward will be expensive. If you look at Imperial Bank and the whole circle on that, the auditors are in problems with the regulators because questions are being asked, where was the auditor? But again, cast some slack on the auditor. They can only do so much. Auditors are meant to be watchdogs, not bloodhounds. But again, the way corporate Kenya is heading right now, maybe we are now demanding more of auditors. Then let's adjust our budgets accordingly to ensure that we get on board and compensate them more.
As we wind up, the Capital Markets Authority, of course, it defines itself as a proactive regulator, and I'm just wondering, does this point in any way a finger in their direction? Because they're supposed to be the person that protects the Kenyan from investing in companies that, you know, cook their books, for instance.
I think the regulator does their job well. Capital markets as an institution is responsible for oversight, and when the public has problems and they bring them in, they make complaints to the Capital Markets Authority, then they go out and find out what is happening, what should we do better, etc. But I think that said, with investments, I mean, the assumption is at least do your due diligence. Analyze and understand what is happening and what are people buying and selling in the stock exchange. There's a reason why Safaricom, for example, its market cap is closer to 700 billion shillings, and the other companies outside of Safaricom, I mean outside of EABL and KCB and Equity Bank and Cooperative Bank are less than 100. There's a reason for that, because over time people begin to appreciate corporate governance and good management practices and internal operational structures, and they begin to put more money there. Safaricom, in terms of volatility, has not been as volatile as some of the smaller companies that you've talked about, etc. So I think that in passing, yes, there's what the regulator needs to do, but by the end of the day, it's your money. You're not going to go and tell the regulator, I have 1 million shillings, and ask them what to do. If you put your money there, at the very least, you need to be able to see what is management doing beyond the opportunity and looking for money. You always have to guard on your downside risk.
All right, thank you so much, the Mwemas, for joining us tonight. Philip Mwema, founder Nexus Business Advisory, and Bitha Mwema, who's also an investment banker with over 10 years experience, and she's joining us tonight from African Alliance. We're taking a short break now. We'll be back with more rights after this break, including a look at Smart Farm. Don't go too far.